There's a temptation when preaching the gospel to avoid difficult teachings, especially the difficult teachings of Jesus or the church, or even to speak about them in a way that lessens the punch that he has in his words. This weekend is one of those gospels in which it would be easy to gloss over the teaching of Jesus and lighten the load that Jesus gives us. The reality is that if we only adhere to the teachings that we like or ignore certain aspects of the preaching of Jesus, then we aren't really followers of Jesus. We are followers of that person that we create in our mind, but not truly the person of Jesus. Sometimes we refer to those persons who choose what they want as cafeteria Catholics, because they choose what they want and they leave the rest behind. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian and pastor. He was a Lutheran pastor who challenged the rise of the Nazi regime from its earliest days. He was a public opponent to Adolf Hitler and was eventually killed in 1945 by that same Nazi regime. In his short 39 years of life, he wrote several books, his most famous of which is called The Cost of Discipleship. The point of the book is to show what it costs to be a disciple of Jesus. And there's a part of the book when he talks about cheap grace and costly grace. His writing on these topics is appropriate for our deeper understanding of this gospel today. And I want to give you this excerpt from his book, The Cost of Discipleship, about cheap grace and costly grace. He says, cheap grace means grace sold on the market like a cheap jack's wares. The sacraments, the forgiveness of sins, and the consolations of religion are thrown away at cut prices. Grace is represented as the church's inexhaustible treasury from which she showers blessings with generous hands without asking questions or fixing limits. Grace without price. Grace without cost. The essence of grace, we suppose, is that the account has been paid in advance, and because it has been paid, everything can be had for nothing. Since the cost was infinite, the possibilities of using and spending it are infinite. What would grace be if it were not cheap? Cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ living and incarnate. Costly grace is a treasure hidden in the field. For the sake of it, a man will go and sell all that he has. It is the pearl of great price, to buy which the merchant will sell all his goods. It is the kingly rule of Christ, for whose sake a man will pluck out the eye which causes him to stumble. It is the call of Jesus Christ, at which the disciple leaves his nets and follows him. Costly grace is the gospel which must be sought again and again, the gift which must be asked for, the door at which a man must knock. Such grace is costly because it calls us to follow, and it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It is costly because it costs a man his life, and it is grace because it gives a man the only true life. It is costly because it condemns sin, and grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it is costly because it cost God the life of his Son. You were bought at a price. And what has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. Above all, it is grace because God did not reckon his Son too dear a price to pay for our life, but delivered him up for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God. Bonhoeffer wrote this in the midst of the Nazi takeover of Germany. And he wrote it, in a sense, in response to the people who were going along with the Nazi regime, even the Christian leaders, many of whom went along with the Nazi regime thinking that everything was going to be okay. They didn't really mean the things that they said about the Jews. They didn't really mean what they meant about the concentration camps. And really they desired to preserve their life, their own lives and their own way of living, rather than giving their own lives up for the sake of another. In our day and age, in Hays, Kansas, living a Christian life comes quite easy. We become comfortable in the way that our Christianity and our Catholicism is lived. We look out and we see, I'm going to Mass every Sunday, I'm going to confession pretty regularly, but our life, when people ask about our life and our Catholic faith, we don't speak about it much. We may drink a little bit too much every once in a while and not think much about it. We might have a serious sin problem, a personal sexual sin problem that it's not that big of a deal. I confess it every once in a while, but I don't actually try and root it out of my life. Yeah, I've got problems with my siblings fighting over some inheritance from my parents, but you know what? It's not a big deal. They just need to get over it. I'm fine. We get pretty comfortable in the way that we see Catholicism to be lived. But what Jesus asks of us is something quite profound. You and I are probably not going to have to hate our father and mother because we are following Christ. I know of people who are hated by their mother and father because they follow Christ, because they became Catholic most specifically. Maybe you are one of those people, and blessed are you for the persecution that you receive. But what about your own children who have determined that it's better for them to get married outside of the church? And you tell them, that's fine, I'll come to your wedding anyway, even though they know better in their life, and they know better than to get married outside of the church. Following Christ in a real way is not comfortable. It's costly. It's going to cost relationships. It might cost us financially. It might even cost us personally. Following Christ in a deep way requires for us to pick up the cross and to follow Him. If we aren't willing to pick up the cross and follow Him, then we need to question whether we can call ourselves a good Catholic or a good Christian. That's the high calling of what it is to follow Christ. What is it in our day and age? What is it right now that God is asking you to give up or to take on? Maybe He's asking you to actually tithe the 10% that we are asked to tithe. Maybe He's asking you to do a ministry in the parish. Maybe He's asking you to serve the poor in a greater way. Maybe He's asking you to sign up for a holy hour, an adoration hour at the Adoration Chapel. What is being asked of you that's going to cost a little bit more for you? If we spend some time in silence, if we examine our conscience and we examine our prayer life, God is going to be asking something from us. He's always calling us deeper into relationship with Him. What is it that He's asking from us? What is our response going to be? Are we willing to say, yes, I will be your disciple? Are we still measuring what that's going to cost? Are we absolutely against it? Where is our heart? What are we being called to? The gospel is a constant ask for transformation in our life. Let's respond with a yes. Because when we begin to weigh the costs of what it takes to live the life that Christ is calling us to, giving up everything in this world is nothing compared to what we receive for eternity. And that's why Jesus says in the gospel today, which of you wishing to construct a tower does not first sit down and calculate the cost,